they gave me a burro that was trained when I first got up there, so I could go down to the town at night, and he would know how to get me back and all of that. And I met Ramon Arellano Felix. Have you ever heard that name?
Wow, from the Tijuana cartel?
The Tijuana corridor. Ramon was 7 years old, and he came with, I believe, an uncle who was a friend of Mimo, the man in charge of me. And Ramon and I would take off on the burros together, and I was 15 at the time, 15, 16.
What connection did his family have to that town?
The man that was my personal bodyguard was a friend to a member of their family, and they would come and visit. Ramon came down 2 times that I can remember clearly, but I think it was 3. But he would come, and him and I kind of became friends, you know?
Yeah.
So I hear him riding with Ramon Arellano Felix when he's 7 years old, 8 years old. And we documented all of that because we knew the significance of history later would be important.
Right.
So later years, I did go to Tijuana, and I did look up Ramon.
Wow.
And I did see him, and I mean, we literally wept and went out and snorted coke and got laid for 3 days and went crazy. And by then, I was already working for the Sinaloa Cartel, but he just told me, you can't say that. They'll kill you, you know?
Now, so it sounds like his family were already getting into the trade.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was marijuana first.
Yeah.
We were all until 79. That's when I started getting my first loads of cocaine. But up until then, for about 5 years, I was driving loads north out of Sinaloa State and through Sonora, entering in through Nogales, Calexico, Mexicali. I can remember coming through Tijuana and watching one of my compadres up on the bridge waving at me as I was driving right under him with the car going into check stations. And pretty amazing. I never got caught. I did probably more than 70 runs.
Wow.
Never got caught.
Of marijuana?
Of marijuana. Yeah, by the time I was doing coke, I was flying.
How much marijuana were you taking at a time?
We could pack in about 80 kilos per car, and I had my college. I was in college at the time, and I had some of my other guys recruited into bringing their cars. And oh Christ, I mean, I built an empire at that time just with a bunch of college students living on GI Bill and unemployment checks. And the next thing you know, we're making $50,000, $60,000 at a time, and this is in the 70s.
Yeah,
it started in 75 when I did my first run through Nogales.
So how did it, so backing up to 69 when you're 15, you were only supposed to be down in this little town for the summer, right?
No, it was a semester and then it extended on. I was down there about a year and a half.
And did your mother know about
She had no knowledge
the
of any of
poppies
that.
and these cartels?
No.
Did your, her lover that owned the mine?
Yes, he did. He was in the business.
He was in the business of heroin as well?
He was a Sicilian. He was in a lot of businesses. He was a very wealthy man, a powerful man.
Now, how did that arrangement work between the mine, his ownership, and what he gave the families? Were they partners in it?
What worked was they produced cash from the harvesting of the heroin, and they just employed people to run the mines. The mine really never was meant or designed to make money, although it made a hell of a lot of money.
Right.
And it was a front operation.
Sure.
I was in country about 3 months. I witnessed my first execution, sitting there having a bite to eat in the cafeteria with Mimo, and this guy walks in and walked right up to this guy at the table next to me and blew his brains out right beside me. And you know, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this. I've never seen anything past fistfights in my life, you know, and this is death. And Mimo told me to stay seated, and he took the guy out there and talked to him, and he came back and says, "Don't ever tell anybody what you see here at the mine, ever." And I never brought it up until I started writing the book 6 years ago. I kept all of the secrets.
What did that do to you?
It was just reality. For some reason, I understood and accepted it, and I was by far not the first execution I've witnessed, but it was the first execution.
Weren't you afraid to die at 15?
I think curiosity played into it more than the fear of death. I'm in a new culture, a new society. I don't understand their language. I'd only been there a few months by the time I witnessed that first execution. And
so you weren't abhorred morally yet?
No.
Yeah, that would come into play later.
Mim would talk to me every day. He explained to me that I'm in a different world. He spoke English. He wasn't of the village. He was specifically assigned to protect me. You know, I was this Sicilian's family, so to speak, and they would have killed him if something would have happened to me. That was Memo told me that himself. He says, don't wander off. Don't do nothing. I need to know where you're at.
Did you tell your mother that you witnessed an execution?
No, I've never told anybody until 5 years ago.
Wow. Okay. So you stayed down there for a year and a half. Did you get involved while you were down there, or would that come later?
That came later, but what I did get involved with is the love for the village, the commitment to them forever. And to this day, I carry it so deeply in my heart.
Wow.
I've never been loved by anybody like I was by that entire village. And they treated me like one of the children. You know, they didn't treat me special or anything. Yeah. And yeah, it's a very beautiful thing. My love for Mexico is, you know, imprinted in me because of that. Even with all the horrors I've seen and survived.
Yeah. It's a great country in many ways.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry the cartels have taken it over.
Now, you must have learned Spanish perfectly after a year and a half.
I learned it semi-fluently at the time, but over the years have forgotten it. And, you know, 5 years ago, when I got hit, I've had memory lapses since then. You know, I was in the death throes in the final moments of life. And we can get into it later or whatever, I don't care. But thinking about it right this minute, I had already released being in this world, and I was very happy. I was at peace. Wow. As the guy was still stabbing me because I knew I was going to be dead in seconds. And I just let go. You know, I gave all this up. And,
that's a freeing, liberating feeling, though, to know that when your time actually does come, you'll be at...
It's a blessing.
Wow.
Because I just felt the love of God. I knew that I was encompassed, you know, and my PTSD doctors that I deal with were very worried for months because they thought that I might try to commit suicide because I kept reiterating to them how ready I was and how wonderful it felt. And I was just done with the world, you know. It was coming to its end as the next part of the journey.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty fascinating. You know, as a doctor myself, I look back through that experience and I cherish it. You know, and as a hospice chaplain, I take people through the dying process all the time. And I really know how important it is to make them ready and prepared to take that final entry stage into that next life.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love doing hospice. I love it.
Wow.
It's such a blessing.
Well, we'll get there. So you spent a year and a half in this pueblita.
Yeah, a little bit less than a year and a half, about 14 months, I think. But yeah.
And then you go back to Everett, Seattle.
Yeah.
Finish out high school?
No, my brother had been wounded in action in Vietnam. I went home, Bremerton Hospital, and my brother was in a hospital bed there, my older brother. And I was afraid to leave him because I thought it would be the last time I'd ever see him. And I spent time on the ward, and I'm looking at all these young men with various wounds from combat. And I was so angry and so upset they had hurt my brother, who has been my idol my whole life. And that I said, I'm going to join the Army. Now I'm 16. Wow. So what I did is I went to the community college, signed up for the GED, got my GED. And 2 weeks before I turned 17, I took my oath to go into the Army. But I had to wait till I was 17 to actually go in.
Right.
So, I mean, I was a paratrooper before I was 18. I had silver wings on my chest at 17.
Okay, so did you go to Vietnam?
No, I did not. I went to Germany.
Okay.
My brother was wounded in action in Vietnam.
I see.
I was in, the war ended in September of 75. I was in from 71 to 74.
Okay. And what were you doing in Germany?
I was a paratrooper.
What kind of action was there in Germany in 71?
Well, we would pull guard duty at Missile Institution, or we'd be up on the Czechoslovakian border. At that time, I've been to Berlin, you know, at Checkpoint Charlie, and you know, we were used mainly in those capacities at that time. And the beautiful thing was, my brother was actually an embassy guard for the United States Marine Corps in Frankfurt at the time that I was in country. So I got to see my brother, and then our father came over, since both of his sons were there, where he was at in World War II. And we took 30-day leaves, and our dad traveled us throughout all the areas he was at during the war. And
incredible.
It really was. It was an amazing time. And then John got transferred to Russia, and I got injured in a parachute fall and was medevac stateside and ETS'd out March of 74.
So March 74, you're a civilian again?
Yeah, I was at the Martinez VA hospital after leaving the Presidio hospital.
Right.
And then when I left the Martinez VA hospital, I went up to Ukiah, Mendocino County, and then Sacramento, and decided to go back to Mexico and visit my village.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. So I was down there in the spring of 74, 75, when they talked me into grabbing a specific type of car and bring it down, and then their chop shops would cut in all the compartments for it. And I mean, it was brilliantly designed. Back in those days, they didn't have the X-ray machines or nothing. Right. And they set it up, and they would dip my prepared kilos of marijuana in a liquid oil. So dog penetration was not a worry. We didn't have to worry about dope dogs.
Wow.
I mean, they had it down, and we would drill a couple holes in the trunk of the car. So by the time I made it to the border, which was 800 or 900 miles, a dust would accumulate. So when they would open up the trunk to inspect the car, it looked like normal.
Right. You've been driving all day.
And they taught me how to smuggle when I was 19, my first crossing, and spray deodorant on your face, wear sunglasses that aren't too dark or not too light, look the officer directly in the eye and answer all of his questions calmly, and you're going to go through. Wow. And that's how I did it.
Yeah. And you made 70 runs.
Over. Yeah.
Wow. So you said you're going to college at this time? Yeah,
I was using the GI Bill, but I started making so much money doing the pot trade that I went ahead and dropped out of school. And then shortly after that, I bought a plane, got a pilot's license, and then got another plane that was a little bit larger and started making hops down into the Arizona desert. Right. And the Yaqui Indians have a reservation, half in Mexico and half in America. You're familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell. And so we had permission through the cartels, because by then we had cartels, to do the canyon flying through their reservation. And then about 200 miles north of Hermosillo, there was a rancher we cut out with bulldozers, an airstrip. So I'd get there, and they would pack the cocaine into the plane there, and then I would take it and fly it back stateside.
So you weren't making any weed drops when you had your plane?
No.
You'd switched entirely to coke. And what year is that?
79.
Okay.
What happened, I was just going down originally I was back there picking up more marijuana and had my other two cars that were following me doing the same thing. And he says, oh, no more. We're not doing this no more. And he says, we want you. So the first time I did bring cocaine in through a car. It was after that I got the plane and did that.
I see. So you must have done fabulously in the weed business to be able to buy a couple of planes, right?
Yeah, we did okay.
Now, did you have your own customer base, or were you just giving it to who they wanted you to give it to?
No, I had a man in Winters, California, just up north of Sacramento, and he had a ranch out in that area, and his barn was that was our head of operations. And that's who we would give it to for distribution. He would pay me so much a pound at that time. Right. And so I just had one customer I sold to.
So you're strictly smuggling. You're strictly transporting.
And selling. It was my marijuana, not his. I did it for me.
Okay, so you had your own. So you were giving it to him. It was my own game.
I built my own operation. But I stayed safe, brother, because I had one person buying it all.
Right.
And then he got taken out by the feds. And then I spent about a year or so out of the business, went right back to being a poor student. That money comes fast and goes fast when you live in that world.
Yeah.
And, but then somebody came up from Mexico and approached me, and that's how I got back in. And,
back then, did cartel have distribution of their own in the United States, or were they simply giving it to runners like you, and then you guys just free market after it crosses the border? You sell it to whoever your clientele is.
No,
how did it work?
They absolutely had brokers in the United States, but what they didn't have was somebody that was blonde hair, blue-eyed from the village, and made it a very unique scenario. So I was given a lot of free gratis to grow it myself. I built the transportation trade routes. We didn't stay just on Interstate 5. I mean, there's spotters and there's people that are trained in law enforcement to detect such activity. Yeah. So I figured out different routes to get it all the way into Vancouver, Canada. I put it on, you'll read in my book, A Fox in the Lion's Den, how we took and used the maritime ferry, and I was running as much as 50 kilos of cocaine at a time into Alaska. Yeah. In those,
which is hugely profitable to sell coke in Alaska, right?
Well, an Alaskan 20 is a $50 bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were doing the pipelines at that time and stuff, and we couldn't satisfy the nature. But I had an organized crime syndicate in Anchorage that they were my only client, and I would deliver to them.
Yeah. And what are you getting a kilo of coke for?
Oh, I think at that time, now that's early 80s, cocaine was pretty high. I think I was getting it at about 18 to 19,000 a kilo, 100 kilo minimums, but it was doing more than that. And I was moving it up there at 28 to 30,000 a kilo.
Yeah.
And I'm popping off 50 at a time. So I was making a couple $100,000 in my pocket after everybody's expenses.
Right.
2 times a month.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
Not counting Vancouver, not counting Seattle.
Right. Yeah. So you get out. So basically you're now in 79, 80. it's fully transitioned. Your operation's fully transitioned.
Yeah,
to
I'm
coke.
strictly cocaine, and I got busted in '84 in Sacramento. I had a small amount found in the house, and they were excited when they found it and arrested. I wasn't home. They hit my house when I wasn't home, but left the arrest warrants on my table when I got home. So I ran out in the garage, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm really going down hard, because up in the rafters, I had concealed an area where I had it just packed full of kilos of cocaine, and all they got were like a couple 100 grams.
Wow.
But it was enough to put me away for 3 years, and I paroled out of Folsom Prison in 1989 with the D number. D64038. That's an original number. If your audience wants to look it up,
What does that mean? Could you tell us?
Well, D64038. Now they have double-digit numbers. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and more people have gone to prison since the time we were in there. But Folsom, I'd never even been arrested in my life. I'd never been in jail in my life. It was my first experience, and so going into Folsom Prison for a first time ever is pretty radical, especially in the 80s when they were rounding up the Southern California gangs. You know, we had the Bloods, the Crips, the Surs, and Norteños. The Aryan Brotherhood even answered to La EME, the Mexican Mafia.
Yeah. I can't imagine how wild Folsom was.
Well, I was blessed because, one, the Aryan Nation attached me immediately because they saw that the high-ranking Mexicans in the yard were in touch with me right away. Word was sent in that this gabacho, this gringo, it belongs to our family in Mexico. Make sure he goes without nothing. Make sure he is protected. We want him to return to us. And the Aryan Nation caught wind of that and went, what the hell is going on? So I actually became somebody who could go in between the two races, because everything is separated by race in federal, state prison and federal. But yeah, it was an interesting time.
And you must have been so unusual because you're this high-level drug trafficker, but you're in a state prison. So they don't see a lot of guys like you in there.
No, they don't see hardly any. Mainly guys like me are federal level. Right. We go into which I did go in the feds later. But
so backing up a little, between 79 and 84, when you did your first stint in prison, how did you see the organizations down in Mexico changing and evolving?
Well, as stated, that's a very good question, John. As stated, they protected me even going into prison. So by then, we were very well established. You're talking 1984. Cocaine had now been on the West Coast comfortably about 5 years at that time. You know, Griselda, who was the representative in Miami for Don Pablo, who was our boss, who the cartels were getting from Don's organization. When Griselda fell here in California, that pretty well evaporated everything for the Miami flows and all of that was going through there. The Cali cartel continued on in Florida.
I see. And, but when Griselda went down, you think that
that really crippled them. It made going through Mexico instead of through the Caribbean the optimum resource for their kilos to make it to the American markets.
And you said you met Pablo Escobar?
No, I did not meet Pablo. Okay. If I said that earlier, that's a misconception. I was involved with Pablo's business. His kilos had the soccer ball symbol on them. That's how DEA formed Operation Northern Exposure to take me out. Okay. They took a 38-kilo bust one night in downtown Seattle. The guy had just left my house. It was a $1.5 million deal, and I gave him half down, and the next day do the rest of the deal. Right. And they grabbed him at an Anthony's restaurant in the parking lot. And they thought they were only getting a guy with a couple of kilos, and they opened up the trunk, and there's damn near 40 keys. Wow. And then they saw the soccer balls on them. And that's when the State Department and the Department of Justice jumped in and said, hey, we got an Escobar representative up here in the Pacific Northwest, and Operation Northern Exposure was formed in 1991. That's when that
Pablo's soccer balls made it all the way from Medellin, Colombia, all the way up to Seattle, Washington.
That's what put the heat on me.
I see.
Yeah, they were used to seeing the Alacran, the scorpion stamps, or the USAs, or the ones that had lot numbers, Estrellas. Those were the kilo brands from the Mexican cartels.
Now, you said the Mexican organization that you were working with or for was actually working for Pablo Escobar.
Yeah, directly.
Were they working for him, or were they just buying from him? Because, at a certain point, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, I say his full name.
That's his full name.
His he at least in lore, popular culture, broke the monopoly that the Colombians had, and instead of working for them, they started essentially buying from them and getting paid in cocaine. So for every 1 kilo of coke that they moved for the Colombians, they would get one for free. And
it was something like that. That's not necessarily true.
Okay,
I did know Miguel Engel personally. I did meet him a few times in Jalisco when he had transferred to Guadalajara and set up his organization there. That's where I knew Rafael Caracantero, and he was from Culiacan, Sinaloa area.
Right.
You know, Rafa and Chapo. And at that time, Chapo was just a weed merchant like I was. Right. So that's how I knew Chapo, you know.
So you knew Chapo from the weed days?
Yes, I did. I sent you a picture of me with Chapo, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. I would be careful showing that.
Now, is he, well, it's going to go in the episode.
Yeah.
But only a couple 100,000 people will see it.
Doesn't matter to me, brother.
What was he like?
Hungry and anxious. He knew he was more than what he was at that time in his life. He knew. Chapo knew very well. And in later years, I was at a cartel wedding in Culiacan. That would have been in 91 or 92. And I was sitting at the table of bosses. My wife was sitting across the plaza area with the wives and mistresses. And then at the main table of the wedding with the wedded couple and their parents there. And Los Tigres de la Norte, a very famous Mexican band, were playing at this wedding that night. And all of a sudden, these guys come running into the place, and they all got AK-47s. And the band went silent. And I remember somebody went back out of the area we were at, and then they brought El Chapo in. And he walked straight to the wedded couple, gave them a present, paid his respect. And then he came over to the table of bosses where I was sitting. And they were saying, when they introduced me to Chapo, they're saying, this is our friend from the Pacific Northwest. Wow. And Chapo told me, he says, oh, I remember you. And he gave me a hug. And it was really an emotional moment.
Wow.
But
so he's a nice guy.
Well, I think Chapo was what Chapo was. I'm not going to comment on nice.
Polite is a better word.
Yeah, ruthless.
Yeah.
Scary.
Was he as ruthless as they say he was?
More.